Starting with a new set, I've already got one audio file dragged in here, which we'll take a look at in a moment, but for now I'm just going to grab this breakbeat, drag it and drop it onto an empty clip on an audio file, audio track, and then I'm going to maximize live, so we're just looking at the interface again. So here it is displayed in clip view. This is the waveform of our audio file. Live's already taken a look at it, decided that its BPM is around 127.36 and has displayed this on a grid for us. But if I turn the metronome on here and launch playback, we'll find that it actually is not lined up. So we need to give Live a hand here and give it some more information so that we can get everything lined up. Inside of the sample window, you'll see that the warp button is yellow already, meaning that the file has been warped. And if we turn it off, you'll see that the grid to the right disappears. And if we turn it back on again, the grid reappears. When we look at the audio file here, if I zoom in, you'll see these little tiny white markers above the peaks in the waveform. And if I zoom in even more, you'll see that they're actually triangles. So these little white triangles represent something referred to as a transience. And at its essence, a transience is the moment of attack or the definitive time that a sound is beginning. And in this case, it's when a stick hits a drum, but it could also be a finger plucking a string or a singer singing the first syllable of a word. So Live took a quick look at this breakbeat and determined where the transience markers should be and conveniently placed them in the timeline for us. So I'll pull back out here again. If I hover over any of these transients, you'll see this little gray box appear over the cursor and disappear as I continue moving along. So these are called temporary warp markers, which can be clicked and dragged anywhere at any time, and you can see it's resulting in this sort of expansion and compression of time. So I'm just going to undo to get us back to where we were before I messed it all around. And if I click on a temporary warp marker, or double click here, I will create a permanent warp marker, which is yellow, visible, displayed all times, and will anchor this transience in place. So even if I clicked a temporary warp marker from here, it would only be affecting the audio on the other side of that transient. And if I created two on either side of this permanent warp marker, I could then independently move the audio in here without affecting the rest of the audio. So I'm just using the undo command again to get rid of all of this manipulation that I've done. When I scroll to the beginning of the file and zoom in here, you'll see that there's a little bit of dead space from where the clip begins and when the audio file actually starts. And this is part of the current issue of not lining up to the grid is. I need to tell Live where the file actually should begin by determining which transient is the downbeat or the first beat. So I'm going to move my cursor over this first transient, and this is an easy file because the first transient is the downbeat. And I'm going to right-click or secondary click here, and this menu will pop up. And I'm going to select Set 1.1.1 here, and then you'll see Live automatically scoot the start marker over, and then 1 is beginning on this transient. So now if I press play, the metronome and the breakbeat will launch at the same time, but they are still not lined up. So the next step here is to tell Live what the original BPM of this file so that we can get it all organized properly on our grid. And to do this, I'm going to temporarily unwarp the file. I'm going to turn the metronome off. I'm going to launch playback, and then I'm going to tap the BPM along here. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pressing stop. As long as I'm able to keep relatively good time, Ableton will tell me what the approximate BPM of any 4 taps in a row are. So by tapping this beat out, I'm finding that the tempo is actually much closer to 96 than it is to 127. So now I'm going to warp this file again and then insert this new information that I have about the file into the segment BPM box. So I'm going to type in 96.20, press enter, and turn the metronome back on. We'll launch playback and see what happens now. So we're much closer, but still not 100% lined up. So now what I need to do is I need to identify the transient of the next downbeat, and then I'm going to move it over to where it belongs on the grid. So if I press play here, I'm going to listen for the second. So here's the second downbeat right here. I'm going to double click, create a permanent warp marker, grab it, and just drag it over to the second beat here, or the beginning of the second measure. And now I'm going to press play. So now we're almost exactly lined up, and you could continue to go in here and, you know, move things and get really specific with it. But I think for the purpose of this, we've gotten really close. So now I want to loop it, and I just want to, instead of moving the start and stop markers, this time I'm going to show you how to loop. I'm going to highlight the area that I want to have looped, just like highlighting text, and then I'm going to use the Command L or Apple L key command. Automatically turns loop on for us. So now if I press playback, we should be hearing this, and it'll loop again at the end of this measure. So we've got a little bit extra happening over here. I'm just going to pull that out, and we are good to go. So I would save at this point now. This other file is a more complicated file that I've already warped, and it's a vocal. It's an isolated background vocal from a song off my last album. And actually all the files from that record are available for you to pull and use via Blend. Live uses different algorithms or processes to warp different types of audio files. So if we look here in the sample window underneath the warp button and the segment BPM box, we're seeing the word beats here. And if I click on it, there are many different options we can choose from. Beats is the default setting and would be best if you're warping a percussive file like a drum kit or hand percussion. Tones would be for something like guitar or bass. Textures would be the choice that you would choose if you were warping a textural ambient part, like some pads or something that was a sustained portion of the song. And the last one I want to look at is complex, which is what we would use for a vocal. So first let's listen to it on the default and see what happens here. So you can hear it's kind of digitized. And I feel like textures may be a valid choice here since it's sort of a sustained ooh part in the background. So let's listen to it on textures. And you can hear this almost like warbling in the background. Turn the metronome off here. And then we'll listen to it on complex. Which sounds really good. So at this point I can do all sorts of things to this audio. I'm going to pitch it up. Watch this breakbeat. Maybe just change the BPM. So now we've warped to very different types of audio.